On this episode today, we're going to talk about the current and future state of regulatory affairs in pharmaceutical and in medtech. Before we start, please make sure to hit the subscribe button. It is very important and very helpful to us. Welcome to Amplifiz podcast. I am pleased to welcome Caroline Shleifer, the founder and CEO of RegASK. Good day to you, Caroline. Welcome.
Hi, Guillaume. Very nice to be with you today.
I'm very happy to have you. Give us the big picture. Why regulatory affairs is critically important in pharma and in medtech companies?
Well, regulatory affair is a bridge between innovation and market access. You need to have this function to help between the innovation that happens with R&D, so from an ID, the R&D, and then how you put that to the market. And that means also how you demonstrate its value, how you discuss and present this innovation and this technology to the regulators. And then how, of course, you build up, I would say, your case with the data and with all the, the substantiation that you need to show that your product is as a function, as a benefit, and also is safe for the public and for the patients.
Right. In our market right now, AI is obviously accelerating and revolutionizing innovation. What is your take on this? Is the regulator struggling to catch up, or conversely, they are at the proactive end of the spectrum here?
I would say it's really a tricky question, because first, the role of the regulators are to kind of safeguard and make sure that the innovation proposed will be beneficial for the patient, beneficial for the public health, and also in the context of societal acceptation. Mm-hmm. So that's their role. And by nature, of course, there's some risk aversion, or at least risk evaluation in the process. And this means also taking your time to evaluate, having the right amount of data, looking at various angles, having the right expertise to evaluate this, and looking at the long-term impact of these innovations. Mm-hmm. On the contrary, on the innovative side and the R&D side, what they want is to push the boundaries, to innovate fast, to bring these products to the market fast. So of course, they are more towards taking more risk. So mm-hmm. There's kind of this contradiction, but at the same time, I think the objective remains the same. How can we bring products to treat patients, and how can we bring innovation, if they have been proven to be valuable, to the patient faster? So overall, this means that there's a need for collaboration, understanding of what are these new technologies, and then working together into bringing this product as soon as possible to the market. Mm-hmm. And you have seen that, for example, there's a great book called The Vaccine. Basically, it was describing how BioNTech and Pfizer brought to the market the vaccine for COVID. And basically how 10 years prior to that, BioNTech was engaging already with the regulators to explain, to present their innovation, to explain how it was working, to mention that mRNA was not present in the body, etc. So to kind of familiarize the regulatory bodies already to with their technology. And so this process helped them to kind of gather among the experts more understanding, more knowledge about their technology, and so better questions when it was not kind of suddenly something completely new that they had to understand, but more kind of a conversation as they were progressing. And they used a rolling submission, which means that every time they had new data, they were submitting that to the regulator. So keeping them kind of updated about the progress and keeping them in the loop, engaging in the discussion during this process. So that helps tremendously in bringing some new product to the market. Mm. And usually this is this kind of positive collaboration and engaging discussion that that is beneficial, I would say, overall, because then it's, at these regulators, at the FDA, etc., you have a lot of experts. They are experts in their field, in technology, etc., and they are here to kind of discuss and evaluate about what is really this technology.
So what is the state of regulation when it comes to the role of AI in clinical use specifically?
Yeah. To date, there's different approach. I would say that, as usual, the US kind of lead the innovation side and want to be, are quite open to innovation, and so are kind of looking at putting some guardrails in place, but still very open to innovation.
Okay.
And so there's less regulatory constraint. There's kind of a big framework, and then more kind of guidelines and use cases based on use cases. Mm-hmm. On the opposite, I would say you can see the European approach, which is usually quite heavy in terms of let's take this problem, let's put first kind of a very comprehensive regulation. And you have seen in 2024 the Regulatory AI Act. So bringing a strong framework around what should be the approach for AI. And this is a risk-based approach. So basically making sure that there's kind of a human oversight, looking at bias, etc. So really quite a comprehensive framework. And then you have Asia, which is kind of a patchwork. You have a mix of between China, which has kind of strong rules, strict rules, but at the same time, very proactive in catching up, making sure that the rules are not preempting innovation. So Japan, which so far didn't have really rules and was more looking at taking a pragmatic approach. And so that's for Japan, who has also recently mentioned that they might put some AI framework, AI regulatory framework around that. And then you have some other countries which so far were kind of like wait and see a bit with a bit of regulations, but who are starting to put some framework as well. So you've seen maybe recent discussion with Thailand, Singapore, who has looked at possibly putting some framework, etc. So you can see different states, but I would say overall the approach is more one leaning towards let's have innovation do its job, and then as a regulator we'll put some guardrails around. And on the opposite side, you have this more like philosophical approach, I would say, from Europe, who is saying, okay, let's take this problem with a broader view. Let's put from the beginning strong framework, and then we'll see. But I would say that the US approach or the US style is very pragmatic, so it allows innovation to happen. And then they are putting, some rules after or mentioning or doing a case-by-case approach. Whereas for Europe, you have this strong framework, but at the same time, it's very difficult to see how it's going to be applicable. So you have a tendency to kind of refrain or restrain innovation with the European activities. And so we've seen recently some challenges in putting innovation on the market in Europe because of this AI Act, which is so broad that it's very difficult to understand how it's going to be applied. And people are a bit concerned about possible backlash with putting some innovation.
RegASK is a partner to regulated industries, and you help them navigate that regulatory complexity with the AI solution. Is that right?
Yes, correct. And, we are talking about AI and the new regulations about AI. So companies today, the industry is facing a constant increase of regulations and a constant increase also in number of topics of regulation. So 10 years ago, there was no AI. 10 years ago, we were not talking about data privacy, or very limited, or very differently at least. So there's numerous new topics. Sustainability is another one. So numerous new topics that regulators are covering. And of course, a big amount of regulations that the companies need to monitor. And so that's a very, very big challenge for them. And it's very critical because it's can expose them to a high risk of non-compliance. So keeping up manually, today these processes are very manual, very siloed, and very little, I would say, technology involved in that. At the most, they have database and Excel to help them on this process. So you can imagine when you are a large pharma or even a mid-sized pharma, how it can be challenging to keep up with all the changes that can happen in all the jurisdiction, and also on the topics that you need to cover. So today, I think the industry has come to a point that it's not feasible to continue to do it manually. And, looking at the efficiency gains that you need to have, but also at the accuracy that you need to have, AI is definitely one of the best solution, I would say, today, and the obvious solution to help keeping up with this process today.
Right. Yeah, and especially in the space of regulation where, I mean, AI and Gen AI loves data, loves content, loves, so this is where it excels, right? So yeah, it makes sense. So that's the value you provide to the industry. But beyond that, what I really enjoyed when preparing this episode was that I came across your 2026 regulatory and compliance report. Very insightful.
So we've surveyed about 160 people, about 50% in the decision making, so leadership positions, C-level, etc., and 50% which are more operational. One of their main challenge remains growth in their business and managing the risk. And of course, managing the risk of non-compliance in one of their top priority. The second one is how to improve efficiency overall and within regulatory. So with that come also the fact that AI is definitely now a solution that they want to adopt. About 40% have started to adopt AI as a piloting. But still 60%, remain at kind of the evaluation phase. And they are looking at how can this be operationalized. So there's kind of this phase about, okay, they moved out from the option of building because they realize that it's definitely not something that is sustainable for companies. One of the main aspects also is that more than 60% are feeling unprepared or underprepared in front of compliance and in front of the changes that are happening. Packaging, for example, there is a lot of regulations that are coming on packaging recyclability, environmental requirements, etc., on new packaging material or single-use plastic, for example, for medical device. So that these are big discussions, and you see that from the time you have the regulation passed to the time your supply chain or your overall process are implementing this change, it's very complex. If you have to change completely your supply chain about packaging material, it's not something you can do in 6 months. It's something that will take probably 2-3 years. We worked with some companies to help them identify what was the mapping of these regulations around environment, and it's quite broad, it's quite complex, it's changing depending on the countries, depending on the region, depending on your product category, if it's a food, if it's a pharma, if it's a medical device. So it's very complex. And so from the time you are telling to your company, oh, there is a new regulation that is coming and which needs to be applied maybe in 2 years, from the time you are organizing all your supply chain to completely change your packaging material, I mean, it's super, super tight. And that's why, understanding also what are these trends of the regulation, that's usually what the industry is calling horizon scanning. So being able to pick, for example, that, in Europe, there's this new regulation, which means probably in the next 6 months to 1 year, there may be some adaptation of this regulation in some countries in Asia or some other countries in Europe or other parts of the world. This is something important. And we're talking also, for example, in terms of signals from consumer, or public scientific publications. If there's some scientific publications around the risk of one of the excipient or one of the risk of some material, you can be sure that few months or maybe a year later, there will be something around a new regulation coming up. So, and you have about 35% who have missed one opportunity to be compliant. So, that still it's a very big risk and very preempting activity that needs to happen.
Right.
So AI definitely is being able to help them here. And we are seeing, and definitely in all our conversation, the industry is now not anymore with should we adopt or could it be an option, but it's more we are going to adopt this year or next. It's in our business roadmap. And how can we better implement, or how can we make sure that we are implementing for the right type of operation within our ecosystem?
We have seen in 2024 a pretty high spike of layoffs in pharma, in biopharma. In 2025, we were hoping for the year to look better, but it's not the case. There's actually more layoffs in 2025 than last year. What are you hearing from the market in terms of is there pressure on the team to do more with less resources? Is it part of the equation and the discussion, or you feel that these teams are somehow preserved right now because obviously they are having a strategic role and critical role for the success of the organization?
So I would say there's two parts. First, these teams are usually or were usually seen as a kind of more an administrative role. Which actually is not the case because it's really strategic. So more and more now in the companies, it's really this is understood and they are kind of preserved. However, these teams were always very small by nature. Even so, they are big for some companies because the company is big. But I would say in proportion, these teams were already kind of under pressure of doing more with less, and so that's why. They are seeing like this AI technology as more like a support in being able to be augmented by kind of this AI colleague, I would say, rather than having the fear of being replaced, because it's definitely not a replacement here. We're talking more about, and this team usually haven't been impacted by these layoffs. It's more like having the pressure of doing more with less, indeed, and it's, you have to do this monitoring, you have to do this dossier submission, you have to do, there's a lot of activities that they need to cover in various markets, in various language, etc. So quite a complex role, ensuring the accuracy and ensuring that there's no risk of non-compliance. So the stakes are quite high. And so for now, we've seen a stable number of people in these teams, but definitely, the industry overall is kind of struggling since the last 2 years, and everyone is watching a bit, and
there's some scrutiny.
Exactly.
Yeah, that makes sense. I understand. So you were talking about, what is fascinating listening to you, of course, is a perfect reminder of the fact that while these companies are global by nature because, medicine, treatment, or medical device and so on, they need to be very much localized in their approach at all levels, and one of which is obviously regulation. And so we see some cases in pharma, for example, where a drug might be launched in, Europe or in the US up to 7 years earlier than when it's accessible in some of our emerging economies in Asia, for example. Why is that, and how can we shorten this?
Yeah, there's multiple reasons for that. One of the reasons initially is because there is a need of you mentioned local data. So usually, you want the regulators want to have kind of a representation of the population in the clinical trial. So it's not always easy to have this if you're not doing global trials at first because of the cost, obviously. You tend to start maybe in US or in Europe where you are localized. And then when you arrive, for example, to launch a product in Japan or in China, etc., the regulators will tell you, okay, but we need these clinical trials on our population because each population has their own specificity. So you have this need to have localized data, which is, of course, if you have to launch another clinical trial, it's another few months or few years. The second aspect is, of course, in terms of access, market access, you need to make sure that some countries we may not have the capability, I would say the infrastructure capabilities to have such drug in the market. So if you have if we're talking about digital therapeutics, for example, you need sometimes some infrastructure at the hospital or with some network, etc. So some heavy material that the country may not have at wide available. So it's another challenge that can reduce the availability of this drug. The third aspect, of course, is how ready you are with the reimbursement of these products. So some product may not be available right away because of the cost that they have, and the companies or the regulators may see this product as potentially for a longer time frame. So I mean, it's a variable, multiple variable that are in place, but definitely, and then you have the regulations, of course. I mean, some countries are tighter than others. So we spoke at the beginning about the EU AI Act, which for some digital therapeutics may not allow for now to have these therapeutics on the market in Europe. So regulations are, depending on how they are structured and how the regulators are approaching this, may not be ready to have this kind of new therapeutics. So definitely it's, delaying the access.
So multiple factors, as you explained very, very clearly, that is making a lot of sense. Is there any specific advice or any specific ways you believe AI could nonetheless help regulators in pharma and in medtech to accelerate and streamline the process as much as possible to reduce that time?
Yeah, so two aspects. I would say the aspect of the companies and how they can speed up this process. So a lot of time there's also delays because of the challenges in document submission, in document writing, etc. So AI can definitely help on the writing of this content, on making sure that there's no siloed, because a lot of time these information come from various teams, and so making sure that there's less silo and less disruption in the process of gathering data. So that's one of the aspect. The second aspect is among the regulators. You have seen earlier this year, the initiative from the FDA launching the 𝐜𝐤𝐤, so basically putting AI in their evaluation process. And so that's very interesting to see that the major regulator is enabling AI and kind of triage of dossier, of pre-screening of dossier using AI. And they mentioned, I think after a few months, a tremendous increase in the efficiency of their process. And they are facing basically the same challenge as the company are facing. They have a shortage of qualified teams to evaluate this. They have a big amount of innovation that are coming in, and they need to have to sort this with more efficiency. So AI is definitely one of the solutions that can help. Of course, there's also, some local state level initiatives like California, for example, who has kind of put some, I would say, some safeguarding around possible bias in these evaluation. For example, in this pre-screening, some possible, they looked also, I think, on the data accuracy, etc. So of course, there's some preparation and some validation that needs to happen, but it's interesting to see a big regulator like the FDA implementing AI in their own process to improve efficiency. And I think that's the best example that can prove that if it's done at the FDA level, companies should adopt it.
It sounds like
we're thinking, it's maybe not too far that you would have an AI in a big pharma speaking to the AI of the FDA to exchange some documents and exchange some submission across wire.
That makes sense. I mean, if I was in charge of the marketing of any company in your market, I think that would be my only ad. I would say FDA is using AI, so why not you? Yeah, I get you. Talking about RegASK, your solution, tell me a bit more about how it works.
In a product life cycle, you have different phases of regulatory information that you need to deal with. The first phase is, of course, the curation of this content. So which regulation applies to me, what is changing, and what is the impact and the risk for me. So for these initial aspects, we have developed several algorithms, and we are leveraging GenAI with multiple LLM and our own ontology focused on regulations for life science. And this help us to kind of source, screen, triage, curate, and push this information to our clients. But after you have all these insights and these AI-assisted impact assessment and risk assessment, the next step is, what do you do with this information? And so for that, we are leveraging agentic AI. So we have developed more than 20 agents who are working for the regulatory team. So basically helping them to automate some of the tasks that they are doing. So it can be like, oh, there's a new regulations around we talked about packaging. Let's update some of the documentation that we need in our product sheet or in our dossier submission, etc. So overall, all these agents are able to work together seamlessly. So it's basically how from the information you're taking, you subdivide the big task in multiple subtasks, and you have agents who are able to take action on each of these tasks. And after that, to get a feedback loop. So we have two types of feedback loop: the agent feedback loop, who is kind of judging how the overall workflow has been done. And then we have also the expert in the loop, because it's very important to keep the human expertise. And so we have this kind of feedback loop from the expert to kind of validate the different workflows that we have put in place. So this is in a nutshell a bit how the technology works. And of course, along the way, you have all the AI features that you would expect from your conversational model like ChatGPT, etc., like summarizing, translating, chatting with them. So we have an AI assistant, so an augmented AI assistant, where we can chat and we can deep dive a bit further into the content. The advantage we have, of course, is that we have a RegASK architecture, which means that all the content is validated. And so there's no risk of hallucination and of inventing things that are not validated as a validated content, I would say. So you can discuss and get ideas and brainstorm on a strategy, etc., with this colleague, AI colleague, I would say. And of course, this saves you a lot of time, because you can ask him, please search all the different, all the regulations that are applicable to this, summarize, put that on a table, and then you can start the discussion and engaging on what would be the best strategy, what have you seen in terms of examples that could be relevant, etc. Quite similar to what you're seeing in legal tech, actually, and how legal tech is helping the lawyers in accelerating their case and accelerating their efficiency in their case. And actually improving the outcome as well.
This is fantastic. Yeah. Caroline, it has been a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you so much, Guillaume. Pleasure likewise for me.
Thank you all very much for watching Amplifiz podcast. To know more about Caroline Shleifer and her company, please check in the description of this video. You can follow our content on LinkedIn. You can download this 2026 report and have more information. Thank you all for watching. Don't forget to subscribe or to give us a comment and likes, and we will answer you with great pleasure. Thank you all very much, and see you soon. Bye-bye.